The noose scraped against May Sullivan's throat as the bitter Montana wind whipped snow across her face, each gust a reminder that these might be her final moments on Earth. The rough hemp burned against her skin, and she could feel the barrel beneath her feet wobbling with each movement of the bloodthirsty crowd surrounding the hanging tree. Her hands bound tight behind her back had long since gone numb from cold and the bite of the rope. String her up. Let her burn with her lies. The voices rose and fell like a pack of wolves, hungry for violence, for the satisfaction of destroying what they feared and didn't understand. Through the orange glow of her burning cookhouse, May caught sight of the faces in the mob men she had fed every morning for 8 months, whose coffee she had poured, whose simple words of thanks had once meant everything to her. Now they bayed for her blood, with the fervor of the righteous, their features twisted by firelight and manufactured rage into something barely human. Red Callahan stood at the front of the crowd, his copper hair catching the flames like a crown of fire. In his green eyes, she saw not anger, but cold satisfaction, and the look of a chess player watching his final move unfold. He had orchestrated every moment of this night, every lie that had led to this tree, this rope, this moment of her destruction. The barrels shifted beneath her feet, and for a terrifying instant, May felt herself falling. The noose tightened, cutting off her breath, and she saw stars explode behind her eyes. But rough hands steadied the barrel, prolonging her agony. They wanted her to suffer, to feel every second of her approaching death. As consciousness wavered, May's mind drifted to the small kindnesses that had sustained her through the dark months, Caleb Morrison's quiet nod of acknowledgement when the others pretended she didn't exist, the way he had helped her clean her vandalized kitchen without being asked, the gentle way he spoke to her one-eyed cat when he thought no one was watching. These moments had been tiny lights in an ocean of darkness, proof that not all men were cruel, that somewhere in this harsh world decency still existed. The memory of Caleb's weathered face, kind and steady, gave her something to hold on to as the crowd's bloodlust reached its crescendo. She had faced death before loneliness, poverty, the cruelty of men who saw her vulnerability as an invitation to violence. But she had survived it all. And perhaps somehow she would survive this too. Then, cutting through the mob's fury like a blade through cloth, came a voice she knew. "You want a hanger? You'll have to go through me first." Caleb Morrison stepped into the circle of firelight, and for the first time in hours, May felt something besides terror, hope. It was dangerous, that hope. It could make the fall that much harder, but she couldn't stop it from blooming in her chest like a flower in winter. But as the crowd turned their attention to this unexpected defender, May saw the odds he faced and knew that hope could be the cruelest emotion of all. 8 months earlier, when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold in the mountain valleys, May Sullivan had arrived at Stone River Ranch with nothing but a battered carpet bag and determination forged in the crucible of necessity. At 29, she had learned to read the subtle signs that marked a place as either sanctuary or trap, and Stone River felt like both. The ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of country so harsh it seemed to challenge God himself. Legend had it that Stone River got its name from a Crow chief who had cursed the valley after losing his son in its treacherous waters, declaring that anyone who tried to tame this land would find their hearts turned to stone. Whether the story was true or not, the curse seemed to have weight. Previous owners had failed, spectacularly driven out by drought, blizzard, and the kind of bad luck that followed some places like a shadow. But May had nowhere else to go. And Vern McKenzie, the ranch foreman, needed a cook desperately enough to overlook her sparse references and the careful way she deflected questions about her past. "You keep the men fed and the kitchen clean," Vern had told her in his gravelly voice, weathered by decades of harsh winters and hard decisions. "Mind your own business and we'll get along fine." The cookhouse became her domain, a solid log building with a stone chimney and windows that caught the morning light streaming down from the peaks. It was simple, functional, but May saw potential in its rough-hewn beams and scarred wooden floors. She sewed curtains from flour sacks, arranged wildflowers in mason jars, and gradually transformed the utilitarian space into something approaching home. For a few precious weeks, she allowed herself to believe she had found her place. The work was hard but honest, and the mountains provided a spectacular backdrop for her daily labors, and some of the hands even offered grudging compliments on her cooking. It was more acceptance than she had known in years. But acceptance May had learned was fragile as morning frost. The trouble began with Red Callahan, though it took her weeks to recognize the pattern. At 24, Red possessed the kind of sharp-edged charm that made him the center of attention wherever he went. His red hair caught light like burnished copper, and his quick wit made him popular with the other hands during the long winter evenings. He had been at Stone River for 3 years, long enough to have influence to be trusted to shape opinions. I don't like to spread gossip. Red would begin his voice carrying the weight of reluctant honesty. But I knew a woman just like her down in Dodge City. Pretty enough, seemed decent on the surface. Turned out she was trouble, left 3 men dead and a saloon burned to the ground before they finally ran her out. The story was pure fiction, but Red told it with such conviction that it took on the weight of truth. He was a master craftsman of lies, building his narrative with careful attention to detail, adding new elements with each telling until May's imagined past became more real than her actual history. She felt the shift in the atmosphere, like a change in weather. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Men who had been cordial became cold, distant. Her efforts to be friendly were reinterpreted through the lens of Red's poison. Kindness became manipulation. Professionalism became calculation. Only Caleb Morrison seemed immune to the growing campaign against her. At 31, Caleb was a man shaped by solitude and hard work, his lean frame weathered by years of life on the frontier. His brown hair showed threads of premature gray, and his eyes held depths that spoke of sorrows he kept carefully hidden. He drifted from ranch to ranch like a ghost, never staying long, never forming close attachments. But he was kind to May in small ways. That meant everything: a nod of acknowledgement when others looked through her, a quiet word of thanks for a well-prepared meal, a moment of human connection in an ocean of growing hostility. She treasured these interactions, like water in the desert, not knowing that they carried their own weight of guilt and memory. What May didn't know was that Caleb's kindness came wrapped in the ghost of a Kansas schoolteacher named Sarah, a young woman whose only crime had been arriving in town, without family connections or an unassailable reputation. Caleb had watched the same campaign of destruction unfold, then had seen the lies spread like wildfire, had known they were false. But he had told himself it wasn't his fight, that speaking up would only make things worse. By the time he found the courage to act, Sarah had been driven from town in the dead of winter. He learned later that she had frozen to death on the prairie alone and abandoned, carrying his silence like a stone in her heart. The memory of that failure haunted him like a fever dream. And seeing May's quiet suffering was like salt in an old wound. Every day he remained silent. Every small cruelty he witnessed without protest added another layer to the guilt that pressed down on his shoulders like lead. As autumn painted the high country in shades of gold and crimson, the campaign against May escalated from whispers to open hostility. Red's influence grew stronger with each passing week, his lies more elaborate, his followers more committed to the narrative he had constructed. The first real attack came on a cold October morning, when May discovered her kitchen-destroyed flour scattered like snow across the floor, salt mixed into the sugar, her precious coffee beans floating in the slop bucket like small, dark islands of waste. Someone had worked methodically in the darkness, destroying not just her supplies, but her ability to do the one thing that justified her presence on the ranch. "Looks like you had some trouble with varmints." Red's voice came from behind her, dripping with false sympathy. Awful destructive creatures, some of them. Sometimes a body's got to set poison to deal with the problem proper. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. May felt the familiar chill of recognition. She had heard variations of those same words before, in other places, from other men who needed someone to blame for their own failures and frustrations. "I can manage," she said quietly, reaching for a broom with hands that trembled only slightly. "Can you, though?" Red stepped closer, and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. "Seems like troubles just follow some people around, don't they? Makes a man wonder if maybe certain folks attract misfortune wherever they go." As Red spoke, May noticed something she had missed before a piece of paper sticking out of his shirt pocket covered with columns of figures, in a handwriting she didn't recognize. For just an instant, she caught a glimpse of letterhead that didn't belong to Stone River Ranch, something about railroad development and land acquisition. But before she could see more, Red noticed her gaze and casually adjusted his shirt, hiding the document from view. The moment passed so quickly, she almost dismissed it as imagination. But the memory lingered, a splinter of unease that would grow into something larger as the weeks passed. Winter arrived with unprecedented fury that year, as if the mountains themselves were conspiring against the inhabitants of Stone River Ranch. The first blizzard came in November, trapping them all in an enforced intimacy that made every tension, every whispered accusation, impossible to ignore. Red's campaign entered a new phase of calculated cruelty. May's winter coat vanished from its peg, leaving her to work in the freezing kitchen wrapped only in her thin shawl. Her bedding was soaked with lamp oil, making her small room uninhabitable. Most devastating of all, her carefully hoarded winter vegetables were dumped in the snow to freeze and rot, months of preparation destroyed in a single night of spite. Through it all, May maintained her dignity, refusing to let them see how deeply their cruelty cut. But late at night, alone in her violated space, she sometimes allowed herself to cry, not from self-pity, but from the exhaustion of carrying such a heavy burden of hatred. It was during one of these dark moments that she found the letter. She had been cleaning the dining area after a particularly hostile dinner when she noticed a piece of paper that had fallen behind one of the benches. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than trash, a fragment of correspondence that someone had dropped. But as she picked it up intending to throw it away, her eyes caught the letterhead. Continental Railroad Development Corporation. The letter was partially torn, but enough remained to make her blood run cold. Pleased to confirm the acquisition of the Stone River property at the agreed-upon price of $85,000. Your assistance in ensuring the current leaseholder's departure has been invaluable. Once the property is clear of existing claims, construction of the northern spur line can begin as scheduled. ACOS. May's hands shook as she read the fragment. Someone was selling Stone River Ranch to the railroad, selling it out from under the owner who was paying them to manage it. And someone had been tasked with making sure the current operation failed, ensuring that the sale would go through without complications. The signature at the bottom was smeared, but she could make out enough to know it wasn't from anyone she recognized. This was correspondence with an outside party, someone coordinating the ranch's destruction from within. As understanding dawned, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The missing supplies, the financial shortfalls that had plagued the ranch all year, the systematic sabotage that had been attributed to bad luck and poor management. It was all part of a larger plan. Someone was deliberately destroying the ranch's viability to force a sale. And May, with her careful tracking of supplies and expenses, had gotten too close to uncovering the truth. She folded the letter fragment carefully and hid it in her apron pocket, her mind racing. This was why Red had been so determined to destroy her credibility, why he had worked so hard to turn the men against her. It wasn't personal hatred, it was business. Cold, calculated, and worth killing for. The next morning brought the fire that would change everything. May awoke not to the smell of smoke, but to the sound of her door being kicked in. Rough hands dragged her from her bed as flames roared through the cookhouse with unnatural speed and intensity, consuming everything she had worked to build. Get her out before the whole place goes up. The voices were urgent, panicked, but the hands that seized her were not gentle. She was thrown face first into snow so cold it burned like fire her thin nightgown, providing no protection against the brutal Montana winter. Around her, the men of Stone River Ranch formed a menacing circle, their faces painted orange and hellish by the dancing flames. Through the chaos, she could hear them shouting over the roar of the fire, their voices combining into something that sounded less like human speech than the howling of wolves. "Look what you've done." Red Callahan's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You tried to burn us all in our beds. I was sleeping." May gasped, struggling to her knees. "I didn't. Sleeping." Red's laugh was harsh, triumphant. "Or making sure the fire caught good before you ran to safety." He held up her mother's woolen shawl, now blackened and reeking of lamp oil. "Found this right where the fire started, soaked in coal oil, and used to spread the flames. She planned this whole thing." The accusation hit like a physical blow. May stared at the ruined shawl, understanding immediately how it had been used to frame her. Someone had doused it with oil and placed it at the fire's origin, knowing it would be recognized as hers, knowing it would be the evidence needed to seal her fate. "Why would I burn down my own kitchen?" she asked desperately. "Because you're crazy," shouted one of the hands. "Crazy and dangerous." "I saw her sneaking around earlier," another voice added, "acting all suspicious." May looked around the circle of hostile faces, searching for even one expression of doubt. She found none. Even Vern McKenzie was staring at her with disappointment and growing suspicion. "Maybe we should wait for the sheriff," Vern suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sheriff's 3 days away in good weather," Red replied. "Could be a week in this storm. You want to keep a would-be murderer around that long?" The crowd's mood was shifting, becoming uglier. May could feel it building like pressure before a storm, the way violence gathered and demanded release. A rope appeared from somewhere in the darkness, and experienced hands began fashioning a noose, with the casual skill they brought to their daily work. As they dragged her toward the hanging tree, a gnarled cottonwood that bore the scars of previous executions, May felt a strange calm settle over her. If this was how it would end, she would face it with dignity. She had survived so much, endured so many cruelties, only to die for crimes she hadn't committed. But she would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her beg. The noose went around her neck, rough hemp that scraped against her skin like sandpaper. She was lifted onto the barrel, the crowd pressing close around the tree. In the firelight, their faces looked like demons from some fever dream, distorted by shadow and malice. "Any last words?" Red asked, though his tone suggested he didn't care what they might be. May looked around the circle one final time at these men she had fed and served, and tried so hard to please. She thought of all the things she could say, pleas for mercy, protestations of innocence, curses for their cruelty. Instead, she chose the one thing they couldn't take from her. "I forgive you," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the wind. "All of you. You've been deceived, but I forgive you for it." The words seemed to land like stones thrown in still water. Several men looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Even Red seemed momentarily shaken by her grace in the face of death. But the barrel was already wobbling beneath her feet, the noose tightening around her throat. May closed her eyes and prepared to die, holding onto the memory of Caleb's kindness like a prayer. That's when she heard his voice cutting through the mob's fury like salvation itself. "You want to hang her? You'll have to go through me first." Caleb Morrison stepped into the circle, and the crowd fell silent in surprise. His weathered face was pale but determined as he placed himself between May and the mob, his hand resting on the grip of his Colt .45. Red's eyes narrowed as he focused on this unexpected threat to his carefully orchestrated plans. "Stand aside, Caleb. This doesn't concern you. A woman about to be murdered for something she didn't do." Caleb's voice was rock steady. "That concerns me plenty." "How do you know she didn't do it?" Red demanded, his voice rising with the first note of desperation. You got some special knowledge the rest of us don't. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with memories and guilt. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won conviction. Because I know who did, and I know why. The words fell into the night like stones dropped into deep water. Red's face went very still, very careful. That's a serious accusation. Red said, his voice controlled but tight. If you know something, speak up. I aim to, Caleb replied. But first, let's get May down from there. The law says innocent until proven guilty, even out here. She's not innocent. Red's composure cracked. The evidence is right there. But doubt was creeping into some faces in the crowd. Caleb Morrison might be a drifter, but he was known as an honest man who chose his words carefully. If you really know something. Vern said slowly, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of authority, then speak your piece. But we're not letting a suspected arsonist go free on your word alone. Fair enough. Caleb nodded. Give me until dawn to present my evidence. If I can't prove who really set this fire, you can do what you want with both of us. It was a dangerous gamble. Some of the men were wavering, but others were reluctant to give up their bloodlust. Red's face was a mask of barely controlled fury as he saw his plans unraveling. But he was cunning enough to recognize that pushing too hard now might expose him to suspicion. Fine, he said with apparent reluctance. But if you can't prove what you're claiming by sunrise, both of you swing. As they lifted May down from the barrel and removed the noose from her throat, she felt her legs give way. Caleb caught her before she could fall, his arms strong and steady around her trembling form. It's going to be all right, he whispered. But she could hear the uncertainty beneath his confident words. They locked her in the horse barn, bound hand and foot, but alive. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see the ruins of her cookhouse, still smoldering orange embers dying in the falling snow. Why? She whispered when they were alone. Why risk everything for me? Caleb's face was etched with pain and determination. Because I failed someone once before. A woman named Sarah back in Kansas. I let fear keep me silent while good people destroyed her with lies. She died because I was too much of a coward to speak up. And now I'm tired of being a coward. He knelt beside her, working to loosen the ropes around her wrists. But I need to find proof, real evidence that will convince them. And I need to find it fast. The barn door creaked open, and Red stepped inside with two other cowboys. His handsome face was arranged in a mask of false concern. Thought I'd check on our prisoners, Red said pleasantly. Make sure they're comfortable for their last few hours. We're fine, Caleb replied evenly. Red's smile was sharp as a blade. You know, Caleb, I admire your loyalty. Misguided as it is, this woman is more dangerous than you realize. He turned his attention to May, his green eyes glittering with malice. You really want to know what kind of woman you're defending? Should I tell them about Colorado, about what happened to that poor boy? May's blood ran cold. Red was fishing again, trying to provoke a reaction that would confirm suspicions he couldn't prove. But the mention of Colorado sent ice through her veins, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she knew how easily truth could be twisted. I don't know what you're talking about, she said carefully. Don't you? Red's voice was silky with false sympathy. Young fellow, barely 19, son of the ranch owner. Took a fancy to the pretty cook, started bringing her flowers. Found him at the bottom of a ravine 3 days later. Terrible accident, everyone said. But you left right after, didn't you? Quite a coincidence. The story contained just enough truth to be believable, while twisting facts into something monstrous. May had indeed worked in Colorado, and the owner's son had died in an accident. But she had left because the grieving family needed someone to blame, not because she had anything to hide. The boy died in an accident, she said quietly. I had nothing to do with it. So you admit you were there. Red pounced. You admit you knew him. The trap was closing with surgical precision. Every word she spoke would be twisted, every silence interpreted as guilt. That's enough. Caleb stood, his hand moving to his gun. Get out. After Red left, the barn fell silent, except for the wind howling through the gaps. May pulled her thin shawl tighter and tried to stop shivering. He's right about one thing, she said finally. I have been running, from one false accusation to another. Maybe it's time I stopped. Don't talk like that. Caleb's voice was fierce. We're going to get through this. Or how even if you find evidence he's already poisoned them against me. They want to believe the worst. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. There's something else. Something Red doesn't know I saw. May looked at him sharply. What? 3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. Went out to check on the horses and saw someone moving around the ranch office. It was Red, and he had a satchel with him, looked heavy like it was full of coins. Understanding began to dawn. You think he's been stealing? I think he's been doing more than that. Caleb's jaw tightened. I think someone's been working to destroy this ranch from the inside, and you got too close to the truth. May reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the letter fragment she had found. Like this, Caleb read the torn document by lamplight, his face growing grim. Railroad development, land acquisition. Jesus, may someone selling the ranch out from under the owner. And I was keeping track of supplies, noticing shortfalls, asking questions about expenses, May said. I was getting too close to figuring out what was happening. So Red decided to get rid of you permanently. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. This wasn't about personal hatred or prejudice. It was about money, about covering up a crime worth thousands of dollars. Red's campaign against her had been calculated to destroy her credibility before she could expose his theft and betrayal. We need more proof, Caleb said grimly. Something that connects Red directly to the conspiracy. The ranch office, May suggested. If he's been coordinating with the railroad, there might be more documents, more evidence. Vern keeps it locked tight. Then we'll have to find another way in. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the barn walls and sending snow swirling through the gaps. Dawn was still hours away, and with it would come the moment of reckoning. As if summoned by their conversation, the barn door opened again. But this time, it wasn't Red who entered. It was Jake Martinez, one of the younger hands, his face troubled in the lamplight. Jake, Caleb said carefully, what brings you here? I've been thinking. Jake said, his voice quick and nervous as always. About what you said, about someone setting that fire on purpose. And, well, I was wondering if someone wanted to burn down the cookhouse. Why use May's shawl? Seems kind of stupid, don't it? Like they wanted her to take the blame. It was a small crack in the wall of certainty, but May felt a flutter of hope. That's exactly right, she said. If I was really trying to burn down the building, why would I use something that could be traced back to me? Jake shifted uncomfortably. There's something else. I've been noticing supplies coming up short, money missing from the petty cash. And Red's always got an explanation, always knows just what happened to everything. You think Red's been stealing? Caleb asked. I think maybe someone ought to take a look at the books, Jake said. See if everything adds up the way it should. It was the opening they needed. Jake, May said urgently, can you get us into the ranch office just for a few minutes? Jake looked scared but determined. I reckon I can manage that, but if we're caught, if we don't try. Caleb said grimly, May hangs at dawn. And if Red's really been selling out the ranch, we all lose our jobs anyway. The young cowboy nodded slowly. All right, but we gotta be careful. Real careful. The ranch office sat in the main house, a two-story log structure that had been built by the original homesteader decades earlier. Most of the building stood empty, but Vern used the ground floor for business, keeping the ranch's financial records and correspondence in a roll-top desk that he locked religiously each night. Jake led them through the bitter cold, moving like shadows against the snow. The main house was dark, its windows blank as dead eyes. Behind them, the ruins of the cookhouse still glowed faintly, a reminder of how much they had already lost. Vern keeps the key hidden, Jake whispered as they reached the office door. Case of emergency. He felt along the door frame until he found a small notch in the wood, retrieving a brass key that gleamed dully in the starlight. The lock turned with a soft click, and they slipped inside. The office was cramped and cluttered, filled with the accumulated paperwork of ranch management. Caleb lit a small lamp while May and Jake searched through the desk drawers, looking for anything that might connect Red to the railroad conspiracy. Here. May breathed, pulling out a folder stuffed with correspondence. Look at this. The letters told a story of systematic betrayal. Red had been in contact with Continental Railroad Development for months, feeding them information about the ranch's financial condition, its vulnerabilities, its owner's absence. Each letter detailed another step in the plan to force a sales supply's sabotaged equipment, lost accounts manipulated to show the ranch was failing. But the most damning evidence was a contract signed in Red's distinctive handwriting, promising him a substantial commission once the sale was complete. He had been paid to destroy Stone River Ranch from within, and May had stumbled too close to the truth. This is it, Caleb said grimly. This proves everything. Wait, Jake said from across the room. There's more. He had found a hidden compartment in the desk behind a false back panel. Inside was a leather satchel filled with gold coins, more money than a cowboy should possess, and a bundle of railroad bonds payment for services rendered. Got him, Caleb breathed. Red's been paid to betray his own employers. But even as triumph flared in May's chest, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps crunching through the snow outside. Multiple voices getting closer. Someone's coming, Jake whispered urgently. Through the window, they could see torches bobbing in the darkness. Red's voice carried on the wind, sharp with authority and manufactured urgency. Time's up, he called. Dawn's breaking and we've waited long enough. Bring them out. Back door, Caleb said quickly. We'll circle around to the barn. But as they gathered the evidence and prepared to flee, the front door burst open. Red stepped inside with half a dozen cowboys behind him, his face twisted with rage as he took in the scene, the open desk, the scattered papers, his own treachery laid bare in the lamplight. Well, well, he snarled. Look what we have here. Breaking and entering theft conspiracy. Seems like our suspects have been busy. We found your correspondence with the railroad, May said, holding up the incriminating letters. All of it. The whole conspiracy. Red's composure cracked completely. You can't prove anything. Those papers could have been planted forged. Could they? Caleb stepped forward, his hand on his gun. Then explain the money. Explain the bonds. Explain why you've been selling out your own employers. The cowboys behind Red were murmuring among themselves, doubt replacing certainty on their faces. Tom Bradley, his voice slow and heavy with regret, spoke up. Red, please tell me this ain't true. Please tell me you didn't try to hang an innocent woman to cover up your own crimes. She's not innocent. Red's voice cracked with hysteria. None of you understand what she's capable of. But his denials rang hollow now, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling under the weight of documentary evidence. The men could see the truth written in contracts, and correspondence could count the gold that represented their betrayal. Vern McKenzie pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grim, as he examined the evidence. His gravelly voice carried the weight of absolute authority when he spoke. Boys, we've been played for fools. This man, he gestured toward Red, has been selling us out to the railroad. Everything that's gone wrong this year, the missing supplies, the financial problems, the accidents, it was all part of his plan. And when Miss Sullivan got close to figuring it out, Jake added his nervous voice, gaining strength. He decided to get rid of her permanent-like. Red's hand moved toward his gun, but he was surrounded now, outnumbered by men who had finally seen through his lies. Panic flickered in his green eyes as he realized his situation was hopeless. "You're all fools," he snarled. "The railroad's coming whether you like it or not. This whole valley's going to be torn up for track and telegraph lines. I was just trying to get something out of it before everything we've built here gets destroyed anyway." By murdering an innocent woman. Vern's voice was cold with disgust. By doing what needed to be done. Red's composure shattered completely. She would have ruined everything, exposed the whole operation. You think any of you matter to the railroad? You think they care about a bunch of broken-down cowboys and their precious ranch? The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Red had confessed not just to conspiracy and theft, but to attempted murder, to a plot that would have destroyed not just May, but the livelihoods of every man in the room. But Red wasn't finished. With the desperate cunning of a cornered animal, he made one final play. His hand flashed to his gun, the weapon clearing leather with practiced speed. But instead of aiming at Caleb or May, he swung the barrel toward Vern McKenzie. "You want to see someone die?" Red snarled. "Let's start with the man who's been too stupid to see what was happening right under his nose." Time seemed to slow as Red's finger tightened on the trigger. May saw Vern's eyes widen in surprise, saw the other cowboys scrambling for cover, saw Caleb's hand moving toward his own weapon, but knowing he would be too late. Without thinking, she lunged forward, throwing herself between Red's gun and Vern's chest. The shot rang out like thunder in the confined space, the bullet meant for the foreman, catching her in the shoulder and spinning her around. She hit the floor hard, pain exploding through her body like fire. But her sacrifice had given Caleb the seconds he needed. His Colt .45 appeared in his hand, like magic, the barrel steady and unwavering as it pointed at Red's chest. "Drop it," Caleb said quietly, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had finally found his courage. Red's eyes were wild, desperate, but he could see his death written in Caleb's steady gaze. For a moment, he seemed to consider making a fight of it. Then his shoulders sagged, and the gun slipped from his fingers to clatter on the wooden floor. "It's over," Caleb said, and the words carried to every corner of the room. Vern knelt beside May, pressing his hand against her wounded shoulder to stem the bleeding. "You saved my life," he said, his gruff voice thick with emotion. "Just returning the favor." May managed through gritted teeth. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." As Tom Bradley and Jake Martinez secured Red with rope and stripped him of his weapons, Vern organized the aftermath with the efficiency of a man used to crisis management. Red would be held until the sheriff could arrive to take him into custody. The evidence of his conspiracy would be sent to the railroad authorities and the territorial government. And May, wounded but alive, would receive the medical attention and respect she should have had from the beginning. But even as the immediate crisis passed, May knew that some wounds would take longer to heal than others. She had been vindicated, her innocence proven beyond doubt. But the memory of that noose around her throat would haunt her for the rest of her life. Over the next few days, as she recovered from her wound and the ranch slowly returned to normal operations, the full scope of Red's betrayal became clear. He had stolen nearly $3,000 over the course of 8 months' money that should have gone to improvements and supplies. His sabotage had cost the ranch dearly, and his plan to force a sale to the railroad would have displaced everyone who called Stone River home. The men who had been ready to lynch her now went out of their way to show respect and remorse. They offered to rebuild her cookhouse, to replace her destroyed belongings, to do whatever it took to make amends. But May could see the truth in their eyes. They were acting out of guilt more than genuine affection. They wanted to ease their own consciences rather than truly honor her. "Ma'am," Jake Martinez approached her on the third day, his hat in his hands, and his young face earnest with sincerity. "I want to apologize proper-like. We were wrong, all of us. We let that snake poison our minds against you. We're mighty sorry." Tom Bradley added, his slow voice heavy with regret. We almost... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the horror of what they had almost done. May looked at these men who had been willing to murder her based on lies, and felt something unexpected pity. They weren't evil men, just weak ones who had allowed fear and prejudice to overcome their better judgment. "I forgive you," she said simply, and meant it. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. The damage went deeper than words could heal. How could she remain here working alongside men who had put a rope around her neck? How could they look at her without remembering their shame? Vern McKenzie made several attempts to convince her to stay. The ranch owner, informed by telegraph of the conspiracy and near lynching, was sending money for a new cookhouse and substantial compensation for her suffering. She could have a raise, better quarters, whatever she needed to feel secure. "It's not about feeling secure," May explained as they stood where her kitchen had been. "It's about dignity. How can I work among men who are ready to kill me? How can they face me without remembering what they almost did? People make mistakes." Vern argued, his gravelly voice gentle. "That doesn't mean they can't learn from them." "Some mistakes cut too deep," May replied. "Even when you want to forgive, some wounds don't heal proper." The decision to leave came naturally. May packed her few remaining possessions, most had been destroyed in the fire, into the same carpet bag she had carried on arrival. But she wasn't leaving empty-handed this time. She carried with her the knowledge that she had faced her worst nightmare and survived, that she had found her voice and used it. Caleb found her packing on her final evening. His weathered face was calm, but she could see the question in his brown eyes. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "East, maybe. Back to more civilized country where the law means something. It's dangerous for a woman alone, especially in winter." May studied his face, this quiet man who had finally found his courage when it mattered most. "Are you offering to come with me?" Caleb was silent for a long moment, staring out at the snow-covered valley. "I can't stay here either," he said finally. "Every time I look at this place, I'll remember what almost happened. What I almost let happen again." "Sarah," May said softly. "Sarah, and you. And all the other times I kept quiet when I should have spoken up." He turned to face her, his eyes clear and determined. "I'm tired of running from my conscience. If you'll have me, I'd like to travel with you. Not because you need protection, but because I need to learn how to be the man I should have been all along." May saw the sincerity in his face, the genuine desire to change and grow. "I'm not looking for a knight in shining armor," she said carefully. "I can take care of myself. I know you can. That's what I respect about you. And I'm not running toward romance. I just want to find a place where I can live without looking over my shoulder." "I understand." May closed her carpet bag and lifted it from the bed. "Then we leave at first light. And Caleb..." "Yes, thank you. For standing up when it mattered, for risking everything for the truth." The next morning, as the sun painted the peaks, gold and pink, two figures rode away from Stone River Ranch. They didn't look back. 18 months later, the sign hanging over the front door read, "May's Table," in neat, hand-painted letters that caught the morning light. Below it, smaller script proclaimed, "Good food, fair prices, all welcome." The building, a converted way station on the road between Billings and Miles City, was modest, but warm, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and honest work. May wiped her hands on her apron and surveyed the dining room with quiet satisfaction. Every table was occupied, traveling families, cowboys, merchants, and settlers all sharing the same space in harmony. She had built more than a restaurant. She had created a refuge where people could rest without judgment. The success hadn't come easily. They had started with almost nothing except Caleb's savings and May's determination. The first winter had been brutal with few customers and barely enough income to survive. But gradually, through word of mouth and genuine hospitality, they had built something precious. More importantly, May's table had become known as a safe haven for young women in trouble. Emma, barely 19 and pregnant with no husband, had arrived 6 months ago and become May's most trusted helper. Rose, scarred by experiences she rarely discussed, managed the accounts with careful precision. Both had found not just work, but family in the warm atmosphere May had created. The new girls asking about work again. Emma reported, nodding toward a teenage girl sitting with her elderly grandmother. Says she doesn't want to be a burden. What do you think? May asked, knowing her employees' opinions mattered. I think she's scared, Rose replied softly. Same as we all were. Could use a safe place to figure things out. May nodded. We'll talk to her grandmother tonight. The back door opened, and Caleb entered with vegetables from their garden. He had aged well in the past year and a half, the constant tension gone from his face, replaced by quiet contentment. Winter squash came in better than expected, he reported. Should last through spring. Good, May said genuinely. We'll need them if business keeps growing. And it was growing. May's table had developed a reputation as more than just a place to eat. It was known as a sanctuary, where the past didn't define the future, where anyone could find acceptance and dignity. She and Caleb had built this new life as true partners, not as lovers, but as companions who had chosen to walk through life together. Their relationship was founded on mutual respect and shared purpose, stronger for its solid foundation. The afternoon was fading when the visitors arrived. May heard the horses first, then familiar voices that made her pause in her work. Through the window, she saw 3 men beside their mounts, looking uncertainly at her sign. She recognized them all. Vern Mackenzie, looking older, but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Jake Martinez, still nervous, but more confident. And Tom Bradley, his face marked by the kind of regret that changes a man permanently. What do they want? Emma asked, sensing the tension. I don't know, May replied, but I intend to find out. She walked outside, Caleb beside her. The 3 men removed their hats as she approached, their expressions carefully mixing shame and hope. May, Vern said quietly, his gravelly voice roughened by emotion. It's good to see you looking well. Mr. Mackenzie, she replied, her tone polite but distant. What brings you so far from home? We came looking for you. Jake said, his quick words tumbling over each other. Took some asking around, but we heard you were running this place. Tom Bradley stepped forward and pulled something from his saddlebag, a piece of painted wood, carefully crafted and beautifully lettered. May read the words aloud. Welcome home, May, the bravest cook in Montana. The silence stretched between them. May felt conflicting emotions, anger at what they had done, sadness for what had been lost, and a small flutter of something that might have been hope. We know we can't undo what happened, Jake said urgently. But we wanted you to know that we've learned from it. All of us. Have you? May's voice carried old pain. What exactly have you learned? Vern stepped forward, his weathered face creased with genuine remorse. We learned that fear makes cowards of good men. We learned that silence in the face of injustice makes you part of the injustice. And we learned that real courage doesn't always come from where you expect it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We also learned that one person's willingness to stand up for what's right can change everything. Caleb showed us what that looks like. May looked at the wooden sign, at the careful letters that spoke of respect she had never received when it might have mattered. She thought of who she had been then, desperate and alone, and who she was now, surrounded by people who valued her for herself. I appreciate the gesture, she said finally. But I can't go back to that life. I've built something here. We're not asking you to come back, Vern said quickly. We just wanted you to know that Stone River isn't the same place you left. We've got new rules about how people get treated. And we tell your story to every new hand, make sure they understand what hatred and fear can lead to. Jake handed her an envelope. This is from the owner. He wanted to make things right. Inside was a bank draft for $700 and a letter of sincere apology from a man who had never met her, but understood that his employees had nearly committed murder in his name. That's a considerable amount, Caleb observed. What am I supposed to do with it? May asked. Whatever you want, Vern replied. It's yours by right. May studied the faces of the three men who had ridden so far to find her. She saw genuine remorse, real change, and the courage it had taken to face the woman they had wronged. This is beautiful work, she said, touching the wooden sign. Who made it? Tom did. Jake replied with evident pride. He's got real talent. May looked at Tom Bradley, remembering his cruelties, but seeing the man he had become. Thank you, she said simply. It means more than you know. It was the least I could do, ma'am. Tom said, his slow voice thick with emotion. No, May corrected gently. The least would have been nothing. This required effort and caring. That makes it precious. She turned to Caleb. What do you think, should we hang it in the dining room? Caleb's face creased in a genuine smile. I think it would look perfect over the fireplace. The three visitors stayed for dinner, sharing tables with other guests and eating May's cooking with obvious appreciation. The conversation was careful at first, but gradually warmed as stories were shared and old wounds began their slow healing. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Vern pulled May aside one final time. I want you to know, he said quietly, that what happened to you changed all of us. We tell the story now not as entertainment, but as a lesson. We make sure people understand what can happen when fear and prejudice go unchecked. I'm glad something good came from all that pain, May replied. You're a better woman than we deserved, Vern said with simple honesty. But I'm grateful you existed to teach us how to be better men. After they left, May stood in her doorway, watching their horses disappear. Behind her, the familiar sounds of her chosen family preparing for another day filled the air with purpose and belonging. Any regrets? Caleb asked, joining her. May said, meaning it completely. No regrets at all. That evening, they hung the wooden sign over the fireplace. It looked perfect there, surrounded by warmth and honest conversation. The words seemed to glow in the firelight. Welcome home, May, the bravest cook in Montana. Later, as they reviewed the day's receipts, Caleb produced something from his pocket, a small handkerchief carefully embroidered with simple words. Saved by truth. I made this for you, he said uncertainly. To remember that sometimes the truth does win out. May took the handkerchief, her fingers tracing the careful stitches. It was the first gift anyone had made for her with their own hands since her mother's death decades ago. The emotions of the day, the visitors, the apology, the sign that proclaimed her courage finally overwhelmed her. For the first time since Stone River Ranch, May Sullivan allowed herself to cry, not from fear or pain, but from overwhelming relief at finally being seen, finally being valued, finally being home. Outside, the Montana wind still blew harsh across the prairie. But inside May's table, surrounded by chosen family and honest work, May was finally completely free. The handkerchief became her most treasured possession, kept always in her apron pocket. When new strays arrived, young women fleeing troubled pasts, men seeking redemption, she would sometimes share her story as an offering of hope, saved by truth. She would say, her voice carrying the certainty of hard-won wisdom. The most powerful force in the world when someone finally has the courage to speak it. Using the money from Stone River's owner, May expanded her restaurant and built a small schoolhouse next door. Rose became the teacher instructing local children and the young women who worked at the restaurant. The school became another symbol of hope, proof that education and opportunity could flourish even in the harshest places. One evening, nearly 3 years after leaving Stone River, May was preparing dinner when a new arrival appeared in her doorway. The young woman was perhaps 20, carrying a battered suitcase and wearing the careful expression of someone who expected little kindness from the world. "We're full tonight," the girl said hesitantly. "But I was wondering, do you have any work I can cook clean, anything you need?" May recognized the look immediately, the same mixture of hope and fear she had worn when she first arrived at Stone River Ranch. She smiled the same warm smile that had welcomed so many others. "What's your name, dear?" Lucy Morrison." "Well, Lucy Morrison, you've come to the right place. We always have room for someone willing to work hard and treat others with respect. Have you eaten today?" Lucy's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Not since yesterday, ma'am." "Then sit down and let me fix you a proper meal. We can talk about work tomorrow." As Lucy settled near the fireplace, her gaze fell on the wooden sign above the mantel. She read the words silently. "Welcome home, May, the bravest cook in Montana." "That's you?" she asked with something approaching awe. "That's me." May confirmed, setting food before the young woman. But bravery isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose one decision at a time. Later that night, after the last guest had retired, May sat by the dying fire with Caleb. The embroidered handkerchief lay on the table between them, a reminder of their journey together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed?" Caleb asked thoughtfully. "No," May replied without hesitation. "What happened was exactly what needed to happen. We found our way to where we belonged. And Lucy thinks she'll stay." May smiled, thinking of the young woman now sleeping safely upstairs. "She'll stay as long as she needs to. And when she's ready to move on, she'll know she always has a home to return to." The fire settled lower, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside May's table, warmth and hope burned bright, a beacon for all who needed proof that second chances were possible, that truth could triumph over lies, and that courage once found could change everything. The handkerchief caught the last firelight, its simple message glowing like a promise, saved by truth. And May Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just survival, but something far more precious: her purpose, her family, and her home. In this small restaurant between forgotten towns, justice had finally found its place, one meal and one kindness at a time. The story was complete, the circle was closed, and truth had won.